What's going on, YouTube? My name is Andrew Miller, editor over at Hook'emHeadlines.com. With me is Tarik LaCour, contributor over at Hook'emHeadlines.com. We are coming back the final week of the regular season, week 13 of the Hook'em Horns show. Talking, kind of recapping the Kansas win last weekend. Looking forward to Baylor on Friday. And then just kind of talking about where Texas is right now in retrospect, and what the team looks like heading into the off season, things like that. But yeah, Tark, I think it was me and Shane on the post game on Saturday after the Kansas win. So give you the floor. What are some of your thoughts?
Well, you saw again why Bijan Robinson is such a special player. You're again at being asked, which again raises the question: why wasn't he used more in the TCU game? Why did Tom Herman wait half the season to put him in? And also, you're seeing progress from the Texas team, but you're still not exactly sure where they are. So this Baylor game will not actually give us any clarity, because even if they win, I'm still going to have the same questions, because Baylor is not that great of a team either. They did play well against TCU. They don't play well on the road. I mean, Texas is playing much better on the road than Baylor is this year. And let this be another case study in anointing a coach too soon, because I don't know how many times on Twitter over the offseason, Texas should hire Dave Aranda, or Dave Aranda is the next great coach, or he had one good season. There's been how many coaches have had just really good seasons based on having very veteran rosters and then kind of falling off the map. Clay Helton at USC comes to mind. Obviously, Ed Orgeron at LSU, those types of things. So we're still not exactly sure where Texas is, but we are at the point now where I feel comfortable with saying Texas is generally going to beat the teams that they're supposed to beat. So that's a step in the right direction. Quinn Ewers, I thought using him as a game manager, especially given the conditions, was very smart on Sark's part. We finally saw Quinn throw a beautiful deep ball to Xavier Worthy, which was, of course, dropped, because this is just not the season of the deep ball. So a lot of questions, not a ton of answers, but Texas will not have a losing season. They could lose the last two games and they'd still have a winning season. So that's good. Things look like they're progressing well with Anthony Hill. Looks like Malik Muhammad and others are solidifying their commitments to Texas, so more reinforcements are on the way for the defense. But what can you say about this Texas defense? I mean, they're shutting down everybody. Didn't let up a score until late in the third quarter after the starters have been pulled. So I think that there are things on that side of the ball to be very excited about. You certainly Sark has found his defensive coordinator that he can live and die with, similar to Dabo Swinney using Brent Venables for all those years. So lots of questions, not a ton of answers, but still lots to be excited about. That's the general takeaway. And also something to be sad about, because Bijan Robinson will be playing one more time, but we will have a very spirited off-season competition between Cedric Baxter, Jaden Blue, Keelan Robinson, and of course Jonathan Brooks, who played very well on Saturday. So what do you think?
Okay, I've given a lot of my thoughts coming out of the Kansas game. I've had to rewatch the game twice now, and obviously followed along for the full game. I'm not going to talk too much more about the Kansas game. I'll link the post game takeaways that I had below. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot of simple things that Texas did well from that perspective of
the Kansas game became what the Kansas game was supposed to be, a smattering and walking away kind of a thing.
Yeah, it was a huge game for Texas in multiple regards. The biggest question mark it still leaves, and you kind of touched on it, was the passing game. But I think the takeaway from that is that the passing game is very much still a work in progress, and that until the deep ball is hit, you're going to see some of these games where most of what you will expect out of Quinn Ewers in a positive sense is that he manages the game well, that he gets somewhere in the ballpark of a 60 to 70 completion percentage, and that he doesn't turn the ball over. And that's kind of what he did against Kansas. It's kind of what he did in spurts against Iowa State, and it's what he did against Kansas State. So I think you saw some nice throws from him. Shane did a good article talking about the progression that you see from Ewers. And when you go back and watch the film on Ewers after games, you realize how many overreactions there are in game on social media regarding Ewers. Even in the TCU game, his wide receivers were not helping him. And so, I mean, you hope to see progress from the entire unit. So
I wouldn't be surprised if you went into Quinn Ewers' closet and there was like a big poster of Isaiah Nayor in there.
yeah, because I mean, I don't know if there's anyone doubting at this point that Nayor probably would have been the best wide receiver for Texas this season. Because Whittington has been good at times, not targeted enough in my opinion, and Sanders has been good most of the season, but I think people forget that Sanders is basically still a freshman, and that, I mean, he's still kind of getting used to this role and this offense, and I think you can see another big jump from Sanders in year 2 if his role increases in an effective manner. So, yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into the Worthy rabbit hole right now, but
we can save that for after the season.
Yeah, there's no people talking about that right now. So, yeah, I mean, I feel good at coming out of the Kansas game. I feel really good that, I mean, I'm not saying that Jonathan Brooks is as good as Bijan Robinson. I want to get that out of the way before making this statement, but you feel good that Jonathan Brooks breaks off about at least to the same rate, the number of explosive plays, and he's averaging the same, actually 0.1 yards more per carry than Bijan. Kansas didn't really yank their starters on defense. I don't know if there would have been a huge difference either way, but yeah, I mean, I feel good about where the running game is headed.
He definitely has excellent vision.
Yeah.
And he has a little more speed and things like that. So there's a lot to like about Brooks's game, but I think Cedric Baxter is the prototype of the Sark running back. Sark loves those big Derrick Henry type runners. Najee Harris comes to mind, and Baxter is that. And so I think even if Brooks is the starter, I think we're going to see a 1-2 punch of Brooks and somebody else. Who's that someone else going to be, and things like that. And I could see going into next year, no matter how good Quinn Ewers is, I think that Sark probably has learned he needs to run the ball 40 plus times a game with his offensive line. no matter who the opponent is.
Yeah, the offensive line is going to be really good next year. Yeah, I guess
DJ Campbell, I thought he was one of the real surprises. He's besides Banks, he's the most aggressive offensive lineman for Texas.
I would have liked to see him getting more. I mean, I think everyone would, but I would have liked to see him get more starting reps for the last few weeks. The transition to playing him, I think, has been a little too slow.
If I'm going to just state the obvious here, if Banks and Campbell had been early enrollees, they both would have started on opening day.
Yeah, and I mean, you can clearly see where Banks had the grasp of the offense and of what he needed to do, sealing the edge and in pass pro to be able to win that job day one. He also had the advantage of less competition, but him starting was more out of necessity than starting DJ Campbell would have been. But mean, DJ Campbell's pretty clearly better than Cole Hudson. I wrote about it a few weeks ago. I think Cole Hudson can still be a quality offensive guard. A lot of the stuff that he's lacking right now is just freshman mistakes. He needs to bulk up a little bit more. Gets a little bit more fundamentally sound. He misses some reads on some pulls. It's not.
I think what's going to end up happening is Banks will be a starter, Campbell will be a starter, and this offseason will be a real fight at who's going to be the starting center, because I could see Majors and Hudson really competing for that spot.
Anglau comes back.
And Anglau too, obviously. And then also keep in mind, I think Cam Williams is going to be really good. I thought he's Christian Jones has been very good this season. Cam Williams, but no one just moves people like Cam Williams. The guy's just a force. He's just like, psh, psh, psh. I was like, oh man, that's crucial. That he's a big reason that Brooks sprang that run, because Williams just knocked over 3 people by himself and could have knocked over more. But I think people were just like, yeah, this is a lost cause. Let's just go the other way. So.
Yeah, my concern about Williams wouldn't be so much of the. I mean, it would mostly be in pass pro at the moment. So, but he's gotten quicker already, and I think he'll be in a spot where he's really ready to compete to take starting reps next offseason.
Don't forget NATO too. NATO's going to be good.
Yeah, well, and I mean, Malik Agbo consistently heard good things about him. So, I mean, there's a lot of depth, and you figure that of like what 6? How many offensive line commits do we have right now? 5 or 6.
We took 6 last offseason, 2022. I think we have 5.
We have Stroh, Kojo, Gooseby, Kirkland, and Chapman. Yeah, 5. I don't think I'm missing any there.
All five of them will likely redshirt.
Yeah, and we'll see if Kojo.
Which is what you want.
It's true. I think Chapman could make an. I think if there was anyone that could make an early impact, it would definitely be him. But I don't think the necessity is there for him to make an impact right away, which is a good thing, like you mentioned. Yeah. So, I mean, I like where the offensive line is. Defensive line's going to have more question marks headed into the offseason. If there's one thing that I do know, it's that the staff is already out looking for answers for the defensive line. Portal's going to play a huge role in the build of the defensive line.
It will be. Excuse me. It'll be interesting to see Bo Davis's recruiting job, who he can get to stay, because I think some of those guys could benefit from staying one more year, as well as they've played. But
who would that be? Because Coburn's probably gone.
I
think Jones is probably gone.
I think they're going to leave. Sweat almost certainly is going to. I could see making a case for both Ojimo and Coburn to come back. Coburn certainly listens to Bo Davis, so if Davis tells him to come back, he would. But we'll see where it goes there. I'm not too worried about it. You have Sadir Mitchell coming in. You have Byron Murphy coming back. Collins likely coming back. I could, and so defensive line I think will be fine with Christopher Ross as well.
Yeah, that's what I was
so you signed a very good haul last year, and I think that depending on how things work on the edge, I wouldn't shock me to see like a Justice Finkley playing with his hand in the dirt as well. So
one name that, sorry to interrupt, one name that people keep glossing over a lot. I think he's still got work to do, but he got a lot better during the offseason is Vernon Broughton.
Oh, yes, Vernon Broughton.
He's not where I think people want him to be at this point. Same goes for Alfred Collins, but they're both playing more consistently than they ever did in the previous 2 years. So, I mean, they're on the right course, I think. So,
yep.
They'll both be good next season.
So, on to the Baylor Bears.
Yep. We should sound less excited.
When you started the season, you thought this game would have Big 12 title implications, and it does, but not the ones you thought. Baylor no matter what happens, cannot get into the Big 12 title game. And even if Texas wins, which I think they will, this doesn't guarantee them a spot in the title game. On top of that, you could really see a team that won 12 games last year go 6-6 the next season. And so it's one of those things where Texas really needs to win the game to say, okay, look, we have a 3-game improvement. We're winning most of our games at home, with the exception, obviously, of Alabama, TCU. So you lost but you lost those 2 games by a combined 8 points. But this is an important game for that type of thing. But it's one of those games where you're thinking, yeah, but you'd like for Baylor to have held up their end of the bargain, so Sark would have another chance at kind of a signature win, but that won't come in this game. This is going to be one of the just worst offenses in the Big 12, and kind of see the problem has been now Texas has been shutting down both the really mobile quarterbacks and the guy staying in the pocket, and Shapen's not a great QB in the pocket or out of it. So, I mean, he's better when he's kind of more on the run. But since they don't have like the game breaker at running back or at wide receiver that they used to, this isn't quite the challenge. And while they still have that great defensive tackle, there are obviously ways of kind of negating that too. So this plays well into Texas's hands, and they should come out with a victory to end the season on a high note. But the game that Texas is going to be paying even more attention to, maybe than their own game, will be the Kansas State game, where we're hoping that Jalen Daniels becomes Superman again and sends Sark to Dallas to see if Quinn Ewers can repeat his Dallas magic.
Yeah, Baylor's an interesting team because it's been really hard to get a hold of their trajectory this season. A lot of people felt that after they beat OU, they were riding a 3-game winning streak, and they were almost ranked back in the top 25 heading into the Kansas State game. I personally felt that was going to have like a huge impact on the Big 12 title game, that was going to be a great game, and then Will Howard and Kansas State completely came out and shut down Baylor. As per usual, TCU Baylor was a close game. Baylor literally threw the kitchen sink at them and more. Grimes really dug into his bag of tricks on that one. A ton of motion, a ton of trick plays, like double reverses, triple flea flickers. I don't know, whatever you want to say there. It seemed like I don't know if you watched the Baylor TCU game last weekend, but wild ending for sure. I'm gonna say that, but Baylor.
I knew Baylor was going to find a way to lose.
They don't have an offense.
Let this be a lesson to any coach who watches our show, which I'm sure isn't many, but any fans are watching. You know what we always talk about, the prevent defense doesn't prevent anything. Okay, when you need a first down, it doesn't really help you just to run really predictable plays just to give them the ball back. You need to actually try to get a first down. If that means you give them a little more clock, you give them a little more clock, but you need to go with an attacking mindset of saying, okay, if this happens, it happens, but I need that first down. And they just did the most predictable things, and it was just like a prevent defense. It didn't prevent anything, and predictably they gave them the ball with enough time, and then played prevent defense themselves to let them get into kicking range, and that was all she wrote. So it wasn't a good coach last few series for Mr. Aranda.
Baylor last weekend was pretty anemic there for that last 11 minutes or so of the fourth quarter, and they've been a pretty bad like fourth quarter team for most of the season. So that's nothing new. But A few things that I'll say about Baylor, just schematically, watching the film that I have or watching them this season, what I do know about them. For one thing, Blake Shapen's not very good. He makes a lot of mistakes. He misses a lot of reads. He's late on a lot of timing throws. If he gets his feet set, he gets in the pocket, he can throw a decent deep ball, so you can't completely fall asleep on him. But the way that Baylor beats you is with a lot of speed in the open field, getting the ball to a guy like Craig Williams or Monterey Baldwin. Those guys are burners. I mean, Monterey Baldwin, he's not blowing anyone away with his stats on the season, but like he's a pretty good receiver. Small guy, like 5'8", like 160, maybe 5'9", 160. He'll take advantage of you if you're going to miss tackles, and if you let him get out in the open field. Craig Williams, another guy that's a burner at running back. He started getting more carries in recent weeks. They like to get the ball to him, kind of off tackle, running to the left. That's predominantly where they utilize him. He's had a few big runs on the season. Richard Reese hasn't been getting as many carries lately. He's down in the single digits in each of the last 3 games, whereas Craig Williams has been in the double digits, when doubling Richard Reese's total. Quaylon Jones is an interesting one of the younger running backs they have, but he's still not getting that many carries. I don't know how much of a role he's going to play. But I think a big key for the Texas defense, for one, just make the tackles you need to in the open field. It's as simple as that. If you get Baylor off schedule, then I think time and time again this season their offense has shown that they don't have the answer. But to rattle Blake Shapen, get pressure up the middle, and be on your assignment. Pay attention to what he's doing, because the guy has 9 interceptions on the season, had one of the highest turnover-worthy play rates at the end of last season in not just the Big 12, but all the Power 5. He just got lucky that none of those throws were picked off in Sugar Bowl or against Oklahoma State or anything like that. So I feel good about the defensive matchup. It's one of those where you have to come prepared to play, be on your assignments, should be fine. Offensively, it's a little bit more complicated, where like it does worry me a little bit with the interior offensive line. Siaki Ika.
Yeah.
If you look at his stats on the season, or if you look at PFF, it's very deceiving compared to watching the film, because he's pretty much been doubled all season, because Baylor just doesn't have the guys necessarily that they did coming down from the safety position, especially, but in the front 7 that they did last season.
No Jalen Petrie makes a big difference.
Yeah, and I'm going to get into this in a little bit. I think I don't know how many Texas fans are going to remember this name from a guy on the recruiting trail that Texas was kicking the tires on for a little bit, Devin Lemire. Lower-rated 3-star guy that Texas was kicking the tires on a couple years ago, and man, he's turned into a really good player for Baylor early in his career. He'll be an impact player to watch, but yeah, you need the interior offensive line to be blocking well, at least decently well, or you can blow up a lot of plays. Off the edges, I'm not as impressed by Baylor, and the way you can beat Baylor, though, is by getting out to the outside, taking advantage of some of the experience they have in the secondary. So, yours has to be at least decent. There's a lot of ways Texas can beat Baylor handily, but you have to execute on offense. Like, receivers can't be dropping balls. Yours can't be getting rattled if Baylor is managing to get pressure on him. They still have a pretty good front 7, so they can get pressure. It's just not as consistent as it was last season. So I mentioned this in the pregame last week, our pregame show last week, where I don't like some of the uncertainty that comes with this Texas offense at times this season, for obvious reasons. Sometimes Texas just lays an egg on offense. And Baylor is still a pretty good defense compared to what Texas has seen in the last few weeks. I don't know. I have a lot of uncertainties.
Luckily, they don't run a lot of that three high safety look that drives Quinn Ewers and Sark crazy. Yeah, I agree with all of that. But I think given the fact that it's senior day, there'll be motivation. I think Sark will come up with a very good game plan to keep Ewers calm. I think TCU opened his eyes a lot. So I'm confident they'll be competent, which is all they really need to be. I don't know if they'll be spectacular, but that's okay. So I'm going to predict 38. That's kind of high, but I still think that 38-17. I think that Texas has held far better offenses to much less. So I just don't see Baylor scoring a ton of points, which they don't do anyway. So, I mean, didn't they just score 3 against, was it Kansas State?
Yeah, they were blown out by Kansas State.
And Kansas State doesn't have a great defense either. So I was not expecting that.
No, but that's a great. Kansas State game was a great example, though, of when you have an experienced defense that holds their assignments and isn't falling for those trick plays. Baylor's offense is just cooked. Like, if you look at like TCU, they can give up some big plays because they're a good defense. They're a decent to good defense, but they're not great. You saw Baylor was able to trick them a few times. It happens. Texas has got to be sound on their assignments. They'll do fine. I said that Texas would beat Kansas 28-21, which was a bad prediction. It turns out, the score that's stuck in my head for Baylor Texas is Texas 28, Baylor 20. I'm gonna stretch that to Texas 31, Baylor 21. Yeah, I mean, you can run the ball on Baylor well enough to the degree where like that's just, like Bijan Robinson's just going to give Texas at least 14 points, I think. So I think like you're working with a high floor in this game. And like it's so straightforward of how to beat Baylor's defense that I think that works well for Sark. He doesn't have to spend eons game planning. It's a short week, so I think that works well. Also, and this is the last thing I'll say about the game, is that I mentioned it in the post game last week where I said I think Baylor left it all out on the field against TCU. I think that was their big game. Short week for them too.
Well, TCU is kind of everyone's big game right now.
It is, yeah.
Who's TCU play this week?
Iowa State.
Okay, wouldn't it be just so funny if Iowa State finds a way to beat TCU?
I don't.
And then again, this is what and then that would be the game to use for Matt Campbell to finally take a job away from Iowa State.
Iowa State, people can't forget that this is what Iowa State does.
Is it at Iowa State or is it at TCU?
It's at TCU, so I think that helps a little bit, but like I don't think TCU's got much of a home field advantage. So
TCU is the number 4 team in the country, but I think that tells you a lot more about the rest of the country than about TCU.
Caught a lot of luck this season, but sometimes it's better to be lucky.
Better be lucky than good sometimes.
Yeah. And I didn't give enough credit to how good Kendra Miller was in the first half of the season. And he is quite good. Anyway.
Is he a sophomore or is he a junior?
Kendra's a junior.
Okay. So regardless of what TCU does this season, pay very, very close attention to what they do next season, because that's really going to tell you like who Sonny Dykes really is. Did you just inherit the perfect team at the perfect time, or are you just this really great coach? I'm still leaning towards I'm leaning towards inheriting a good team, and then he'll come back more down to earth next year. I mean, if they manage to win 9 games next year, then Dykes has something going there. But if it's like, okay, they regress back to the mean almost like Baylor has, which is more what I expect, then you kind of have your answer.
Yeah, I mean, Big 12 landscape's going to change so dramatically next year that
I want to let's end on this. So it looks like Sark. Most people before the season were saying 9-3, 8-4. Looks like Sark will probably get 8-4. Maybe 9-4 with the bowl game. The best potential outcome would be 10-4 if we won the Big 12, which ironically would be the same as Tom Herman's second season, except winning the Big 12. So my thought for next season is that given the talent advantage and what Texas brings back, if Sark doesn't win the Big 12 next year, I think it will be viewed as a disappointment.
I don't know if I'm going to go that far. But
yep, I kind of am. I think the first two. I've said this for a long time. The first 2 years, I really don't count for or against you because it's really not your team. It's you coaching someone else's team. I mean, I know the transfer portal changes that a little bit, but mostly it's not really your guys. So year 3, this is your team. This is your culture. This is you. So then Texas is going to be by far the most talented team in the Big 12. And they're going to have a returning quarterback. They're going to have a very experienced offensive line. And even with a lot of departures, a very experienced defense if you have Ford and others coming back. So there's just not going to be a ton of it. And also some of the hardest games are going to be at home. You're going to have to get Oklahoma State at home, for example. Obviously, Oklahoma is always neutral site. Kansas State is going to lose. And most other teams are going to lose basically all their best players. So you're going to have Kansas State losing Deuce Vaughn. You're going to have Oklahoma State losing Spencer Sanders finally.
I don't know if he's going to go.
If Sanders comes back, I just like, what do you even say at that point?
I don't know. I don't need to spend too long on that, but yeah, I think that he looked like a middle school quarterback against OU last weekend. But
why he always gets up for Texas. Even the games when Texas has won, he's played pretty well.
He's never played well in Norman. That's more specific. Yeah, he's done really well in Stillwater, done really poorly in Norman, which, yeah, but anyway, which I don't know how, because that OU defense is dog poop. So I don't know. Anyway, last thing that I wanted to do, and then we can get on out of here. What do you remember who your preseason prediction was for the Big 12 championship game? I'll have to go back and look.
I think it was Texas, Oklahoma State.
Okay. Which, not a bad prediction.
I did think Texas would sneak in, but I also thought Texas would beat Tech. So the only game that I thought Texas would lose Bama, Oklahoma State, and one other team, and I can't remember who it was. I think maybe it was Baylor. But
Kansas State?
No, I thought we beat Kansas State. Kansas State just, even when they're playing well, I'm just like, they just don't match up well with Texas. I don't know why.
It's completely flipped the last 5 or 6 seasons.
Yeah.
So
that's
fair.
I certainly didn't expect TCU to play as well as they have. No one has expected that. But the question is, do I think that Texas could beat TCU in a rematch? I'm not sure. I lean towards. I certainly don't think Texas would have the same defensive. They're not gonna. I don't think you're gonna hold them to 17 points again. And that was amazing to do that. But I don't know. I don't. Having said that, I don't think TCU would be able to hold Bijan Robinson to that, and I think Quinn Ewers would play slightly better. I mean, that was literally the worst game of his life. So, and he played better against Oklahoma State than he did against TCU, and he was bad against Oklahoma State. So
The wide receivers were so bad in both games too. The passing.
he threw some really good. Now the difference would be against Oklahoma State, he threw some really good passes that just weren't caught. That one that went right into Sanders' hands and then became an interception. That touchdown that Worthy dropped. Several other drops that Worthy just didn't jump up for. I think that's another reason Nair would have been so good, because Nair can win those jump balls, and he's also really tall and long. So, I mean, there were some passes in the TCU game. I was like, Worthy just could have fought for that a little bit more, but we'll save that. So,
Okay.
moral, Sark, you have to win the Big 12.
Okay. So are you thinking that do you think it's going to be TCU Kansas State? Do you think Kansas State going to hang on Saturday?
The Big 12 never makes any sense, so it's not going to shock me if they don't. And I think Jalen Daniels after last week and Kansas after last week will want to kind of ensure a winning season for Kansas. And Will Howard, he's been prone to show he can still have a bad game, even though he's a lot better now. So we'll see. If it gets into a shootout, I can see it going Kansas' way, but they'll have to move the ball a lot better than they did before. So we'll see.
Okay.
If I had to predict, I'd say it's going to be TCU versus Kansas State.
Yeah.
And I would presume then that TCU would win and go to the playoff. And it doesn't matter who TCU plays, they will be smothered by Georgia, by Michigan, Ohio State, USC, LSU. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. I actually think that there's a good to fair chance that Kansas State could beat TCU.
I think they could. I just don't think they will.
They were doing so well against TCU on the road when Will Howard came in, and I get that TCU wasn't prepared for it. So anyway, I think it's funny that if Texas does make it to the Big 12 championship game and lose, that they'll be a 5-loss team probably in the Sugar Bowl. So
that would be so funny.
I know.
I was like, oh man,
yeah, but potentially against LSU, it'd be interesting. But anyway, I think that's about all I got for the week. I'm pretty exhausted with hoops back. It's a busy time of year. So
yes, we'll have lots to talk about because I think this Texas team is going places.
Yep, me too. Well, and then post game on Friday, I'll be coming back at y'all. Not sure yet. We'll reconvene, talk to Shane, figure out what we're doing for the post game on Friday. But for me, Andrew Miller with Hook'emHeadlines.com, Tarik LaCour from Hook'emHeadlines.com. That's pretty much it.
Welcome.